hopefully this presentation will help you better understand perhaps our ideas of flash flood impact based warnings and really impact based warnings in general. Let me go ahead and hopefully start this up here. There we go. Yeah, good. Okay. So yeah, and so hopefully this will help you better understand what we're doing with our impact-based warnings. We're going to talk specifically today about the flash flood impacts based warnings, but really a lot of this can apply to our tornado warning impact-based warnings, and soon to be at some point in the next year or two, we're going to be starting severe thunderstorm impact-based warnings. We'll talk more about those in the spring. In our spring IWT, but today I wanted to really talk a lot about the flash flood impact-based warning, since we did have so much, unfortunately, so much flooding this year. So, again, this year we did start our impact-based warnings for flash flooding. We've been doing it for a few years for tornado warnings, but this year we started it for the flash flooding. And in reality, the big thing is that our warnings, instead of just giving generic information about how much rain's fallen, flash flooding's possible, these warnings will now give you specific information on the impacts of what we're thinking of flash flooding. Because the fact is, we can tell you as much rain as it's gonna any information about the rainfall. But really, you want to know what we're thinking the impacts could be. And this is an example from Chesterfield County back on August 15th, and we know how horrible that flooding was. We have a specific impact here: life-threatening flash flooding of creeks and streams, urban areas, highways, streets, and underpasses. And that's exactly what happened, right? We also talk about how much rain did fall and what was actually going on already. But again, this is the key thing here is the impact. We're starting to talk about life-threatening flash flooding. And then you also notice down here at the bottom, we have this little tag that says considerable. And we'll get more into that in a little bit. And again, I have this impact. Yeah, I should have kept clicking through there, and I would have highlighted that for you. So why are we doing this flash flood IBW, impact-based warnings? And as we know, the impacts from flash flooding can vary quite greatly, right? From sort of the nuisance flooding, some water maybe getting on the roadways, a couple inches of water, still could be dangerous. Obviously, if you have a person like this, driving through it, that certainly would not be encouraged. So you have sort of the nuisance flooding to the more significant flooding. That's where you start seeing maybe some roads being washed away, certainly some roads, major roadways being closed due to high water, interstates, major U.S. routes, underpasses completely underwater, in urban areas where, if you drive into it, you're probably going to submerge your car. A little bit, definitely more significant flooding to that life-threatening version, the catastrophic flooding, to where, there's swift water rescues, where if you get into a flooded area, your life will immediately be at risk. And so here's the problem, right? We have a wide range of flash flooding, from this nuisance flooding to this catastrophic flooding. And, back to a year or two ago, we really didn't have a good way to convey that in our flash flood warnings. Yeah, we could put in, some extra words and some extra statements to highlight it. But at the end of the day, the warning still looked the same. I mean, it was still, the same general warning. So, again, and this is an example of what we would have done in the past. This is from Michael back in 2018, when there was significant flash flooding going on out in Farmville and out in the Piedmont counties. And again, we knew at that point that there was going to start to be some pretty bad flash flooding here. But again, the wording was pretty generic, right? There was really no indication that there was potentially a significant flash flood event going on. Now, granted, later on in the event, we did start to actually type in some of the a little bit more extreme, and we actually did end up issuing a flash flood emergency for Farmville. But at the beginning here at 4:41 that afternoon, again, we just sort of had this more generic warning. But now, again, and this is the big thing, and I think I want to really point this out is that we have a lot of new tools, a lot of new science, a lot of new ways to look at flash flooding, and it allows us to have a better understanding of the direct impacts during heavy rain events, which leads to, again, the products like this that has this detail and has this information, life-threatening. We put in the sources now. We put in exactly what is going on. So again, it's just more information for you, and it's important for you to recognize that our warnings are going to have really important information in them. So it is important to look them over and to if you have a moment and see what's going into it, because we are putting in that impact information in. So many of you, especially in the media, we visited last about a year ago, before all this COVID hit, but we visited many of you in the media, talking to you about what we were planning on and what we were thinking about doing with our flood statements and our flash flood warnings, and this is sort of how, at least in the weather office here in Wakefield, we're doing our flood products, especially our flash flood products. So you sort of have the low end. You have the flood advisory, and this is where you might have some standing water. You might have some water getting into some roadways. It really is that true nuisance flooding that that is just is just going to be around for an hour or two, a couple hours after the heavy rain. It may impact some minor roads, and maybe some driving delays, but it's not a huge deal. It's sort of that place where when it floods, these places usually start to see it first. So that's something that you will see quite frequently from us in the weather from the National Weather Service in Wakefield during these events that we know there's some nuisance flooding going on, some minor flooding in roadways, overflowing in ditches, but nothing that we think is going to be in the life-threatening, more significant category. Once you get to the point to where we think there's a little bit more significance going on, that there's some more than just the basic nuisance flooding, a little bit more widespread, a little bit more maybe in the way of road closures, especially from water flowing in the roads. You could also see water getting close to businesses or homes. That's where we would issue the base flash flood warning, and this is what you're going to see still from our office most of the time. And these are some of the impacts that you would normally see in the warning that we would issue for a base flash flood. You'd see flooding of small streams and creeks, some urban areas, some highways, streets and underpasses, as well as drainage and low-lying areas. We don't mention anything about the life-threatening impact yet. Obviously, any flooding can be life-threatening, but if people take the proper precautions in a base flash flood warning, don't drive into flooded roadways. Don't go swimming in the waters or whatever. It shouldn't be life-threatening. And this is the tag. Remember those tags at the very bottom of the product that I showed you? This is something that you'd see. You wouldn't have any impact, anything with regards to the impacts. It would mainly just be what we're showing from the flash flood and how much more rainfall we're expecting. So you go up and sort of go up in the category. This is where you get into the considerable flash flood warning, sort of that red alert. This is where you're starting to see roadways flooded. In fact, this was Powhite Parkway in August, on August 15th. Just completely flooded. The roadways are shut down. Water flowing quickly, flowing across roadways. I mean, you never want to drive through this. You just don't know what's underneath that water. Starting to see water getting up into homes, and this is probably a borderline even flash flood emergency, which I'll talk to in a second. But regardless, there's definitely much more significance to the flooding. And again, we've issued multiple considerable flash flood warnings this year, especially on August 15th in Chesterfield down into Isle White County, Surrey, and Prince George. And also we issued some in September as well for Isle White, Smithfield, with that significant flooding that went on there that morning. And I forget the date. I apologize. But regardless, this is where you really start to, and again, I've been hitting on this really hard this morning, but this is where you really start to see the impact starting to talk about flash flooding or life-threatening flash flooding of creeks and streams, urban areas, highways, streets, and underpasses. And again, this is where you start to see this flash damage threat come into play, and those tags at the bottom. And that's when it starts to say considerable. Many times when we issue this considerable flash flood warning, it will be observed. Sometimes it won't be. I mean, sometimes we can use it. We will issue it based on our guidance. But a lot of times, as I say up front here, many times a base flash flood warning will be upgraded to a considerable flash flood warning. And so and a lot of times that's because we're starting to hear about observed, conditions, of similar to what happened on August 15th. So think of this as sort of the red alert for flash flooding, definitely getting to be life-threatening. And then the worst of flash flooding, the worst sort of the catastrophic flash flood warning is the worst flash flooding that you will see, and this is where we're starting to hear or indicate, hear about or see indications of it on our guidance. Multiple swift water rescues, destroyed structures, life-threatening situations from flooded roads and homes, and this is something that will be rarely issued here, but it will be. I mean, I will say it has been issued, and it will be issued in the future, unfortunately. In fact, we issued a flash flood emergency. This was before the IBW, but we still had the emergency option back in 2018 during Michael, and we did issue a flash flood emergency for Farmville and parts of the Piedmont counties. And this is how it would look even today. You'd have right off the bat a bold headline: flash flood emergency for certain locations here. And then you go forward into sort of the meat of the product. Again, life-threatening flash flooding continues. But we talk about swift moving water, damage to homes, water will damage roadways and bridges, very, very extreme flash flooding. And again, this is something that we won't issue often, but again, it will be issued from time to time, and you need to look for it. And this is something that if we issue it, this is a true emergency, and action needs to be taken. Sort of the purple alert, the worst of the worst. And you just see some examples here This was actually from Farmville back in 2018. This is another image, not from our area, but again, something very significant, very, very dangerous. Excuse me, very, very dangerous. So one thing I wanted to, so that's sort of the hierarchy of flash flood warnings. One thing I do want to bring up to everybody, and this is important if you don't know already, and we did find this as being, I wouldn't call it an issue. It was just something that we noticed in the Chesterfield flooding of August of this year, is that the WEA, the wireless emergency alerts, only alert on your cell phone for considerable and catastrophic flash flood warnings. So again, the base flash flood warning will not be WEA alerted. Now, all flash flood warnings, including base, will continue to be alerted on NOAA Weather Radio and EAS. But this did, I wouldn't call it confusing, but it was just an interesting side note to the August 2020 event in Chesterfield, where we were initially issuing the base flash flood warnings when the rain was just starting. We knew there was starting to be some flash flooding. We never knew at 6 in the morning or 6:30 in the morning that the rain was going to get that extreme. So we were initially starting with the flash flood warnings, but then around 8:30ish, I forget the exact time, but it was around 8:30. That's when we started to issue the considerable flash flood warning tags, and that's when everyone's cell phones went off. And immediately people are like, well, we're already getting flash flooding. You're just issuing this now. Well, no, we actually did have a flash flood warning out earlier, but again, it was just the base flash flooding. So this is something more just for your awareness as much as anything, that your cell phones will not activate, at least for WEA, until you get into the considerable or catastrophic warning thresholds in our warnings. So what that means is that you certainly need to have another way to, if you want to see all flash flood warnings for your county, you certainly need to have another way to get that information for even the base. Subscribe to INWS if you're an emergency manager, or something, something like that, to make sure that you get those warnings. So remember, I talked about the flash flood warning evolution and how many times we will sort of upgrade our warnings to from a base to a more considerable. And sometimes we will go directly to considerable, especially if it's an urban area. But the fact is, many times we will start with a base and go to a considerable, or if it's really bad, go to emergency. And this, again, Chesterfield County was a really good example of this here. Is that initially we had this flash flood warning for and we had flash flood warnings everywhere, but this was just once in particular that for the Midlothian area, extending to Powhatan County. This area of flash flood warning for this area here. And again, for this area of heavy rain, which was 4 inches. I mean, it occurred over 3 or 4 hours, so that's a lot of rain. But at that point, it wasn't extreme. It wasn't extreme. But then a couple hours later, or an hour and a half later, we noticed that's when the rain really started to get out of hand up towards 288 and Midlothian and stuff like that. And that's where we're starting to get 6, 8, 9 inches of rain falling over just a few hours. And so what we did, and you can see the difference here, is that between the green, which was the initial flash flood warning, the base flash flood warning, and then this red, which was the considerable flash flood warning, we tried to pinpoint where those higher values were the worst flash flooding ones was. We didn't blast the whole area. I mean, eventually we ended up having to issue considerable flash flood warnings for much of the county just because the rainfall was so extreme. But at this moment in time, we limited the considerable to this smaller area surrounding Midlothian. So So if you were a person, right in the heart of this, you would have been WIA alerted immediately. Meanwhile, if you were, out here in Powhatan County, out here where there wasn't as much rain, yeah, you still would have had a flash flood warning, and I know they'd still had flooding, but it just wasn't the extreme extreme, dangerous flooding as it was, in Midlothian. So again, that's one of the best practices in our office is to really try to pinpoint where these considerable or catastrophic, flash flood emergency type situations, really try to pinpoint down as best we can. Obviously, August 15th just got absolutely just absolutely got crazy with the rainfall, and we ended up having much of the county under considerable flash flood warnings, just because of the between the rainfall up in Midlothian and then the various creeks, Swift Creek and so on, the runoff from those becoming very, very dangerous. But again, at this moment in time, and this would be, something you would see, even in the middle of summer with, pulse type thunderstorms, where they just, those thunderstorms just sit and just for hours and hours on end, just keep raining over one area. This is the kind of evolution you would see. So one thing, and this is where I'm really going to leave off here, and end. Even though we do have a lot of exciting and new tools to evaluate the impacts of heavy rainfall, and this is a great example of a tool that we have. It's called Flash, that it actually tries to relate the rainfall to how much water is. It's called unit stream flow, but it's basically trying to determine how much water is actually accumulating over an area, actually accumulating on the ground where the flooding is happening. And again, this is from Michael back in 2018. But we have a lot of these tools to really allow us to better understand what might be going on in an area due to heavy rain. But the fact is, nothing is better than your reports for this. And I know we always tell that to you, and it's true every time for severe weather and winter weather and everything. But in flooding cases, it's as important as ever, because the fact is that we may have an idea that there's a dangerous situation going on in this area, but we don't know for sure. And any information that you can give us, road closures, what the water is doing, so on and so forth, is critical for us to get that information out, because we now have a way to get that information out and easily, get that impact out directly to the public. And that's really what we're trying to do, is trying to set that stage with the public to see, instead of just saying, oh, there could be some flash flooding, saying that, what, this is life threatening. Do not, be careful, do not go on the flooded roadways, or you're going to be in trouble. And so this is where this communication is so important, and it's a two-way street. So, by us getting that information from you, we can quickly get it out to the public, and vice versa. If we're seeing some really bad things going on in our data sets and our radar, we can relay that back to you. And that's all I have. Hopefully, and again, I think hopefully this sort of better allowed you to better understand some of our impact-based flash flood warnings. Hopefully we were done with flash flooding for a while. But I really wanted to sort of set, while all the flooding and the heavy rain was sort of fresh in our minds, I really wanted to talk about this, and we will be talking a lot more about tornado and potentially severe weather IBW impact-based warnings in next spring. But with that, I would be happy to entertain any questions if you have them. So.